Hey everybody, what's up and welcome to Guns N' Roses Central. And with Guns N' Roses wrapping up their this leg of the Not in This Lifetime tour, which saw them go through Israel as well as Europe, I thought I wanted to do a little recap about their concert in Israel they did back in 1993. Now, there was 5 shows where Gilby Clarke wasn't able to play. He had broken his wrist in a motorcycling accident that he had been participating in for a charity event, and Izzy Stradlin was able to fill in for those dates. So the first date was in Israel, then they played Greece, and then they played Turkey, and then they played 2 shows in Milton Keynes. So the first show that Izzy was back was actually in Israel. And if you guys have watched the documentary Photographic History, the actual rehearsal footage with Izzy in the studio is actually in Tel Aviv, Israel, and some of the interviews that Slash did in the actual interview were also taken in Israel as well. So Slash talked about the actual show in Israel and about the time that Izzy came back into the band. He was surprised and happy to hear that Izzy went for it, referring to the fact that Izzy would come back for a couple shows, though I was completely confused to hear that Izzy didn't want to rehearse at all, not that we had much time anyways. As it turns out, the political situation in Russia in May of 1993 was too unstable for us to play Moscow, so we flew to Tel Aviv, Israel to rehearse with Izzy before we launched the tour there at the Hayarkin Park Arena. We booked a rehearsal space in Tel Aviv, and it was a trip. This place was a recording studio, as well as I think the engineers didn't believe the band booked was actually us until we walked through the door. We got together in this cheap old spot that was homey in a foreign way and run by these old people who were really cool. It was an average rehearsal space with mid-range recording equipment, and they'd clearly never had anyone like us in there before, so we totally blew them away, and for that reason alone, it was worth it. Izzy showed up with dreadlocks and hadn't practiced one song, so we did what we could. We played to 50,000 people in Israel for the first time 2 days later, which was the biggest concert that the country had ever seen. Sadly, it was a pretty loose set because Izzy wasn't up to speed and hadn't been conscientious about practicing. The press criticized us pretty harshly, saying that we used the opportunity as a warm-up date, which was not true at all. We all wanted it to be great, but with rhythm guitarist who was still unfamiliar with the material, there's only so much we could do. We did the gig, we hung out there for a couple days, and we saw all the sights. Izzy, Duff, and I saw where Jesus was born, and we went to eat in the square around the Wailing Wall. While we were sitting in this outdoor cafe near the zoo, I watched a busload of school kids get off for a field trip. At either end of the bus were parents, teachers, adult supervisors of some kind who were armed with assault rifles. They arranged the kids in line for the tour of the zoo, and one armed adult took to the front, one took to the back, and one walked in the middle of them, all with a rifle strapped around them. I'd never seen anything like that in my life. I'd had a friend from Israel who had gone back for 2 years of mandatory military duty, and I thought about him just then. He'd come back a completely different guy. He'd gone off as a nerd and returned as a nerd with combat experience. So Guns N' Roses, before the gig, they fly from LA to Tel Aviv, and the band, suffering from jet lag after the long flight, spends the next couple of hours in the hotel pool. Meanwhile, Matt Sorum goes out for lunch, and journalists end up going through the garbage outside the restaurant where he actually ate the lunch. And this show is the biggest music concert, like I said before, that ever held in Israel. So at 9 p.m., Guns N' Roses hit the stage for the first show of their European leg of their Get in the Ring Mother Effer Round 2 tour. And it's a 19-song set, and partway through the actual 19-song set, the band breaks into a rousing rendition of Hava Nagella with Axl wearing a Guns N' Roses shirt. So after the show, the local record company introduces the 14-year-old son of Israel's most famous solo artist to the band, and the boy faints. So Guns N' Roses play Israel on May 22nd, 1993. They were supposed to play Moscow on May 21st, but of course that show was canceled, like I said before. So the set list was pretty standard for the Skin and Bones tour. So, they opened with It's So Easy, followed by Mr. Brownstone, Live and Let Die. And then they played Jungle, Attitude, Double Talk and Jive. And then they would play this acoustic set. So they bring out a couch, they bring out a coffee table, and they bring out their acoustic guitars, and they play You Ain't the First, You're Crazy, Used to Love Her, Patience, Knocking on Heaven's Door. And then they'd play a partially acoustic November Rain. And then they'd go back to the harder rock stuff, with You Could Be Mine, Sweet Child of Mine, Dead Horse, and then closing out Paradise City. They also did play a bit of the famous Hebrew song Hava Nagella. Now, there exists no fan footage from the actual show. The only pro shop footage that I've seen that exists is the MTV Grease special that was done. So there's a special on YouTube of the band hanging out on some yachts, doing like a tour of the Greek Isles, and they keep showing footage from what a lot of people think is the Athens show that Guns N' Roses played, but it's actually not the Athens show. It's actually the show that they played in Tel Aviv, and that's the only pro shop footage I've seen. I've seen a little bit of news footage too, which I've linked to down below, that shows a bit more pro shop footage, but the only pro shop footage that that's basically exists for the whole concert is whatever Guns N' Roses recorded. As you guys know, they recorded every show on the Use Your Illusion tour. It's just sitting in a vault somewhere. Now, Axl Rose's personal assistant at the time, Craig Duswald, wrote a book called Welcome to My Jungle, and he talked about a story from Tel Aviv. So, in one of Axl's suitcases, we had always had on hand about 15 to 20 bags of special bath salts that weren't available in your typical bath and body store. I forget the purpose for the bath salts except for the obvious use in a bath, but that doesn't matter for the story. What does matter is that they were kept in a plastic bag inside medium-sized gold boxes. Yes, they looked like bags of pure cocaine, and we were Guns N' Roses, potentially a very bad combination. We were in Tel Aviv, Israel, and we were about to get on a commercial flight, so that meant we had to go through the airport, the regular airport with the regular police. Robert was carrying one of Axl's Halliburton suitcases, and inside the suitcase are maybe 3 to 4 of these bags filled with the white powder substance in gold boxes. We were in a hurry, and he did his best pack mule impression. Axl, Earl, and I led the way, walking briskly through the airport so we didn't get stopped by a gaggle of fans. Robert started to lag behind, and I could only assume it was because he was carrying numerous bags. I figured he'd catch up when he got to customs, so we pressed on. A few moments later, I looked behind and I saw Robert slowing down. I took a closer look, and he seemed to be dragging the right leg, almost like Igor from Frankenstein movies. Again, I thought nothing of it because my focus was to get Axl on the plane with little fan interference as possible. We arrived at the customs line, and I looked back to see Robert still dragging his feet, but now sweating. He finally arrived in the gate in panic, stress written all over his face. He whispered, "One of the bags broke." I didn't follow. He whispered again, "The bath salts," as he suddenly points to the trail of white dust about 50 yards long. His attempt at covering up the powder was futile at best. My immediate thought was that we were in a foreign country. I started thinking about customs, would have had a field day with them. Strip search came to mind. But in all seriousness, this was bad. As I looked around the airport, I saw that it was filled with soldiers carrying machine guns. We opened the Halliburton suitcase, and there was white powder all over the place. One of us was going to have to take one for the team because we could not get Axl involved with trying to explain that white powder was bath salt. So I did the manly thing and told Robert to deal with this while I made sure Axl got on the plane with no incident. Robert frantically and very carefully fixed the leak in the bag before he had to go through customs to board the plane. As Axl and I got through customs unscathed, I turned to see Robert going back over his trail, shuffling his 2 feet over the white powder trail, blending it into the carpet. It was quite the dance. I kept thinking of the movie Midnight Express and thought that Robert might get to experience that. But God was shining on us that day because Robert made it through customs and onto the plane, disaster averted. But those damn bags of white powder almost came back to haunt us in Buenos Aires, Argentina on the last 2 days of the Use Your Illusion tour. And around the same time, in the same book, Craig Duswald talks about another story that happened, and I'm sure this probably happened in Israel too. So he says, I remember Axl asking Robert the day before our show in Istanbul, Turkey, that he wanted classic Cokes in his dressing room the next night. This was when Coca-Cola was trying out new Coke. However, Axl loved classic Coke, but everyone else was supplying new Cokes backstage. So Axl told Robert to get him a 6-pack of classic Coke for the show the next night. Well, no one in the entire city of Istanbul had classic Coke, so we had to fly out some classic Coke from the United States by the next day. We flew in cans of Coke all over the world, and that's what we did every day. We would do the research, and we would be very resourceful, and we would use the money and our connections in each city to get things done fast. Now, Izzy reflected on those 5 shows he actually played with Guns N' Roses. So he said, it was weird. We toured Israel, Greece, Istanbul, London. I liked that side of it, seeing some places I'd never seen. But that was the only thing he liked about it. Money was a big sore point. I did the dates just for the salary. I mean, I helped start this band. After the show in Milton Keynes, where Izzy left, he recalls that he never even said goodbye to anybody. He said, I didn't actually say see ya because they were all effed up. Duff and these guys, they didn't even recognize me. It was bizarre. It was like playing with zombies. Aw man, it was just horrible. Nobody was laughing anymore. And prior to Izzy coming back and playing those 5 dates, Axl put out a press statement saying, Izzy and I grew up together and were like family in a lot of ways, including having our differences, Axl explained. And when this statement was actually brought up to Izzy, Izzy simply smiled and shook his head. Well, what else could he say? They were kind of in a spot, and if I hadn't agreed to help out, they might have missed out on that whole leg of that tour. So that does it for my recap of Guns N' Roses' history in Israel. I know that Guns N' Roses played Israel back in 2012, and there is a short little interview that DJ Ashba did with some Israeli media outlet you guys can check out. But whenever I'm focusing on this stuff, I always like to talk about what people consider the original lineup, or at least the lineup that consisted of Duff and Slash and Axl together. And people were very fortunate that Izzy came back for these shows. So if you guys are going to the Israel show, let me know what your expectations are. Did you guys go to the 1993 show? Comment down below and let me know, guys. And as always, make sure you hit the like button if you enjoyed the contents of this video, and be sure to hit the subscribe button if you love Guns N' Roses as much as I do. And follow me on social media. The links to my Facebook and Twitter are down below as well. Take care.